In the mid-1970s, super robots were getting the biggest boom they'd appreciably ever experience. Every studio had a giant robot show, and Go Nagai was getting pulled in 15 different directions at once to produce designs for what was ostensibly the same robot show over and over again. But how did they make the mold to stamp out all these machines? The answer came in the form of a show called Chodenji Robo Combattler V, and a whole lot of parts of it will seem exceptionally familiar to those of you who grew up with, say, Voltron or Power Rangers. Our story concerns that very familiar situation of an alien race invading and a group of characters in multicolored uniforms going to settle their hash. I could be describing any number of shows with that, but in 1976, when the first Sentai, Go Ranger, was still being produced, this was fairly novel. Go Ranger at that point did not have giant robots attached to it that would come much later on in the series. While there were attempts made like Go Wappa 5 Godam, that one had too many fits and starts to really get off the ground. Combattler V, today's subject, was entirely more successful. While it may sound ridiculous now, the team consisted of the classic version of the five-man band. The hero, played by Hyoma, decked out in red, was a motorcyclist with a hot temper, no shocker. The Lancer was played by Juzo in blue, who was an Olympic marksman. He was the collected one compared to Hyoma. The big guy was Daisaku, the smart guy was Kosuke, and the chick was Chizuru Nanbara, whose father, Dr. Nanbara, was responsible for creating the title machine. Sound familiar? It should if you've paid much attention to super robot shows of this era, or, saw Power Rangers once in your life. Yes, Super Sentai would take to it later, but that series only had been running for 2 years at that point with none of the kinks worked out. Yes, Gatchaman had done something similar, but they weren't off the air long enough for it to sink in, and they sure as hell didn't have a giant robot. This was important because it was the spike over the net that those series had set up. When producers looked back at how to run an ensemble cast mecha show, they looked to Combattler V and its descendants. Likewise, the design of the robot was exceptionally important. While combining robots had been created by Getter Robo and Getter Robo G, the machines often disregarded physics to an alarming degree. Combattler V knew what it was doing when it opened up and what fit where to make sure the machine could actually be combined when they made toys of it. This may seem obvious now, but the impact would be particularly felt once Super Sentai and other robot toys would be put into production. It's important to note also that Combattler V is the codifier for shows that came later, but its impact was made mostly on Sentai more than anything else. However, while all Super Robot shows owed a lot to Getter Robo and Mazinger Z, any Super Robot show that went in for the five-man band, the color-coded uniforms, and the transforming robot can trace its lineage back directly to Combattler here. The series would have two follow-up shows that came in the same vein, Voltes 5 and Tosho Daimios, making up the Robot Romance trilogy that lasted until 1979. So why does no one know about them? Well, it came out in the 70s for starters, and for all of the good releases that we've had in the States very recently of old anime, this one is probably going to keep flying under the radar. Voltron would end up being extremely popular, but that wasn't for another couple of years before it was produced, and Power Rangers, which by that point had gotten its hooks into this particular style of show, would not air until 1993. Marvel did have a handle on the property for a minute with the Shogun Warrior line too, but that lasted about as long as a fart in a windstorm. It was also a little violent for something that would have been promoted exclusively to children in the 1980s. And remember, no one was paying attention to kids' TV in the 1980s, but everyone was paying attention to kids' TV in the 1980s. But the biggest issue is simply that it sat in the same era that Captain Harlock and many other classic anime fell into, in that it was just too old to get swept up in any of the big booms. So in spite of its clear quality and genre-defining nature, Combattler V just didn't have the necessary momentum to get a big release stateside. Again, this was a time when if you didn't get on TV, you didn't get anywhere. So without that lifeline, Combattler V just didn't have a transforming leg to stand on. Regardless of how important it is, here's to you, our truest codifier for combining super robots, the super electromagnetic robot Combattler V.